This is kind of an odd time in Phish's history.
I came into Wilco with me being the guy with the story.
It was sometimes appropriate for Soundgarden, sometimes not.
20 years writing about music. Dozens of cassettes in a drawer. Get ready for conversations that time nearly forgot. Dave's Old Interview Tapes.
Hi, I'm Indianapolis Star reporter Dave Lindquist, and welcome to Dave's Old Interview Tapes, a podcast that digs up musical conversations from an era when corn was a massive band and high fructose corn syrup was a minor problem. Today's episode revisits a 2001 interview with Trey Anastasio, the Phish vocalist-guitarist who was on the road with his second ensemble, the Trey Anastasio Band. We'll hear Trey talk about how he defines a good live performance.
You know how, the room can get all in sync? Yeah. And it's just this feeling that everybody's grooving, and it's just, then that's what I'm looking for.
Hear about the night Phish played a whole lot of Led Zeppelin at Deer Creek.
It just starts to happen. It's pretty much an extension of kind of the offstage sense of humor.
And hear him talk about his love of music from Africa.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do with this band is combine sort of like a dance vibe with the African juju music, King Sunny Ade, Fela Kuti, bands like that, with sort of a big band aesthetic.
Our in-studio guest for this episode of Dave's Old Interview Tapes is Ryan Hickey, co-founder of the famed multimedia party Orange, president of digital marketing company Pulp Functions, and a DJ who goes by the stage name of Helicon. Ryan, how are you?
I'm well, Dave. How are you?
I'm good. It's 2019, another summer when Phish will not grace Indiana. That's kind of a bummer.
It is a bummer. I'm starting to wonder if Phish will ever grace Indiana in the summertime ever again.
I would love to see Phish play a winter date at Bankers Life Fieldhouse, because I've never seen them inside. And the full Chris Kuroda's light show for the whole night, I think, would just be that much cooler.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's three things I want to talk about there. I'm a huge fan of indoor Phish shows, indoor concerts in general. As much as I love being at Deer Creek and the whole summertime experience, and you're hanging out outside in the lot and all that, to me, there's more of a focus on the band and that connection between the band and the audience, which is obviously huge for Phish and Trey if you listen to any of his interviews.
Right.
So that connection is stronger in the indoor show. This is my opinion, of course. There's something about, particularly in like the first set of an outdoor show, where it's still light out and you're just not quite there. And then secondly, yes, anyone who's seen Phish a lot, or even if you've only seen them a few times, right away that Kuroda's lights are a huge part of the band and a huge part of that experience. Yeah. And you get, like we always say, like you get two sets of lights at an indoor show, basically. Yep. And then the third thing I want to say is I too have always wanted Phish to play at Bankers Life and do like a 2 or 3 night run. And I don't understand, the intricacies of the routing and the tours and the booking and all that to know why they haven't, but fingers crossed. I hope that happens one day.
Especially because we seem to have fallen off their regular summer rotation.
Most definitely.
Throw something in the winter.
Yeah, I think they've sort of figured out, and again, this is more like the business side of it versus the music side of it, but they've figured out that maybe the regional draw in Chicago makes more sense. Yeah. And then they're doing Alpine Valley and Cleveland and all these other places, which is great. But it seems like Indy has kind of fallen off of their routing for sure. The other thing that I think too, and maybe this is just me noticing it and it's not an actual thing, but it seems like Bankers Life is booking more big name shows in the last 5 years or so than they were previously. Am I wrong there, or is that?
I think what that room is really taking advantage of is modern production. If you're an A-list act, you want to go in and do the show you want to do. For all the reasons we love Deer Creek, it will never be a place where you can strike the stage and make it anything you want it to be. And in the arena, you can walk in with a blank slate and make your show whatever you want it to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. Certainly they're A-list in my book, but are they that like that pop band that comes in with this like massive production? I mean, they're pretty much, it's like their show has been
It's
like
still
the
an old
same,
school kind of
yeah,
show.
it's an old school rig. It's like lights and a stage.
Yeah,
they don't really have theatrics, and it's not like what's the, you know, people go to Phish shows and they're not wondering what the stage production is going to be like that tour. They're just wondering how the band's going to play, and like maybe what new songs are being played or what old songs are going to, you know, like the bust outs is like what they call it, you know.
Which, again, where we started, we don't want to discount Chris Carotto's lights, because it is, if you haven't seen it, he paints music with his lights, if I can kind of
for sure
use that phrase. All right, so let's back up.
Yeah.
When did you see your first Phish show?
That would have been the fall of 1995. It was like the end of November.
Clinton era.
The Clinton era. It was a much different era, politically, socially, in our country. I was a young freshman at Indiana University and went to see them in Dayton, Ohio at the Nutter Center.
Okay.
And I've now seen both of the shows they've played there since then, too.
Are you a person who has a number at the ready to how many shows you've seen?
You know, that's a great question. I think okay, so first of all, no. But because that's something that a lot of people talk about in the Phish community is like how many shows you've seen. I feel like I've seen, despite the fact that I feel like I've been to a lot of shows, my number pales in comparison to people that I know and kind of go to shows with, or, you know, like I know these people who've seen like hundreds of shows. I'm like, how's that possible? And I think the answer to that for me is, obviously, you know me, and anyone who else knows me knows that I DJ in the Mud Kids, and I have a lot of other musical interests, and I have my own gigs, and so dedicating that much time to one band is difficult.
Gotcha.
As much as I love Phish. Sorry guys, I can't see you all the time, but yeah, I'm somewhere, I think, just shy of 100 shows.
Okay, yeah, nothing to sneeze at there.
Right. It's still quite a bit of investment in time and money.
It's a band that I think virtually 100% of people asked this question would answer. It's more of a live band than a studio recording band.
There's no question they are a live band, and that's the true essence of the Phish experience, is to see it and hear it and experience it live. Having said that, I'm also, like, I've bought every studio album they've ever put out.
Right on.
And I think early on, like when I was in high school and I was like first listening to Phish, because I was really into Frank Zappa and still am.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how, like, when I heard Phish, I was like, oh wow, this is totally up my alley. You know, like the humor in the music and the composition, you know, like Trey was writing all these fugues that were being incorporated into songs, and that just like instantly appealed to me. There's like probably 5 or 6 bands that I've been a fan of since I was a kid that, like, the second I heard it, I loved it. You know, like Zappa and Phish and Mogwai and some of these other bands. It was like I heard it and I was like, I need more of that. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, like, I was listening to some of that studio music, you know, their albums in high school, because I was 15 or 16 and not able to, like, travel the country, and they weren't coming to East Lansing.
That was the entry point.
Yeah, that was the entry point for me. And then, you know, the live stuff, and this is also like, you weren't downloading music at that point. Like, you were definitely trading tapes or getting tapes from people at best. And you had to kind of be somewhat tied into that scene to even get to that point. And that's when I really was like, when I started like collecting, you know, tapes, and I was already into this with the Grateful Dead, but the Dead were, you know, literally reaching the end of their career at that point. And I was at the last show. And then I think at that point it was like the Phish interest like really kicked in.
Sure. That's fascinating to hear Zappa as the departure point. A lot of people talk about the Dead.
This isn't a bad thing or a wrong thing, but a lot of people certainly correlate Phish and the Dead. There's no question there's an obvious connection with, you know, the 2 sets of improvised music and then an encore. Phish sort of followed the blueprint of the Dead, whereas, you know, for those of you who are listening to this who have no idea about what it's like to go to a Phish show or Dead show, your average band that's out on a tour is most likely either doing one of a couple things. They're either out promoting the new record and they're playing the songs from the new album, or they're on like the opposite. They're on somewhat of like a nostalgia tour, right? You know, so if it's like an older band, like I'm not even going to mention any names because I don't want to offend anyone, but Phish and the Dead and some of these other bands that have kind of stemmed from that improvisational rock subculture have really focused more on digging into anything in their repertoire on a given night and kind of exploring, hence the name jam bands. They sort of explore these improvisational jams that take these song structures into different avenues and just different explorations on a given night. So what you could see, like the question you always get from people who don't go to Phish shows is, why would you go see the same band over and over again? And the answer to that is always, the show's not the same. Whereas if you went and saw, I hate to use this word, but your average band on tour, they're literally playing the same show every night. It's very rehearsed. There's even some like timing points to it and things like that, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, that's the difference between the two. I think a lot of people make that correlation between Phish and the Dead for that reason. But the reality is that there are many more influences besides the Grateful Dead that appear in them, particularly in Trey's guitar playing.
Yeah, definitely. I had a chance to get on the phone with Trey in 2001, and one of the things I was eager to hear was, what's it like from that side? You know, you are more or less the leader. I think it's fair to call him the leader of Phish, one of the most iconic live bands in rock and roll history. What's it like for him at the end of the show? How does he rate, or how does he gauge if it was a successful night or not?
If you're to come off stage, and it's more a feeling of how the whole vibe of the room and the communication between the band members would probably be the more telling factor about, you know what I mean? I don't really think of the guitar playing that much. It's kind of the most natural part of the whole thing for me. And then, so if I feel like the room is in, you know how, like, you know, the room can get all in sync? Yeah. And it's just this feeling that everybody's grooving, and it's just, then that's what I'm looking for.
That's, to me, kind of the essence of what we were just talking about in the jam band structure. To me, it's kind of a plus and a minus, in that you can go a long way in a show with this type of act, where you're kind of slogging and you're struggling, but you see the musicians working, and that in itself, when it's not working, is kind of interesting to watch. But then if everything gets stacked right in the right order, and this song flows into this one, and within this song they did this, the payoff can be like exponentially more than a band that played the same 17 hits.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like if you see that, what you just mentioned, you know, that band playing kind of the rehearsed 17 hits, it's almost just like it sounds like any, you know, like greatest hits album or something like that.
Like a Broadway show or something.
It is like a Broadway show, which there's definitely some amazing things that come along with that too. And or like, yeah, I mean, if you've ever like sang in a choir or performed in an orchestra or something, it's the precision is what you're striving for there. I mean, it's like rehearse it over and over and over again to make it perfect, you know. And with the jam band and particularly Phish experience, and certainly with the Grateful Dead started, you know, many years ago, it's like, all right, let's start with and it really is rooted in jazz, you know, but let's start with this structure and let's see where it goes. And like you said, you're taking a big risk as a band doing that, because you can have some off nights, and there's some times, and people certainly critical of Phish's longer jams say this, where they lost me, like they lost me when they played Tweezer for 40 minutes or whatever it was. But it's like, you're, as a fan, you're also kind of giving them some opportunity to take that chance, because you're also hoping that risk pays off, like you said, when it's really all. And if you've been to enough shows like that, you've certainly seen the ones where you can kind of sense that the audience and the band both is like ready to, all right, let's wrap this one up and move on, because it's just, we've lost the momentum here, you know? But then when it's really like hitting on all cylinders, there's nothing like it.
Well, I think all four of them, Page, Mike, Phish, and Trey, I mean, they all are, I use a term like they can direct traffic, you know, within a song. They can steer things toward a positive resolution. I'll use this opportunity as I have in the past, probably, to say Phil Lesh, for instance, the bass player in the Grateful Dead. I've seen him twice play solo shows. And back in the era where the Indie Star would give star reviews, on a 4-star scale, I gave 2 separate Phil Lesh shows 1 star because the dude is just up there meandering. Nobody's leading this parade. That is not enjoyable.
I agree completely.
Not to put you on the spot about
no. And I would also prefer to not hear Phil sing.
Oh yeah.
At any point ever again. Yeah. I love you, Phil. I love the Dead, but that's not the forte in that particular musician. Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to what you said earlier. Trey is definitely the leader of Phish. Obviously, is the leader of the Tab, Trey Anastasio band too. But to some extent, that's kind of what was burning Trey out. Like kind of right around this time was that pressure of having to make every decision and be the leader on everything. You know, particularly when Phish went from 4 guys in a band to this organization.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just a band anymore; it's a company. You know, and so I think when he was able to kind of go through what he went through and kind of back off of that and then come back as like, all right, I'm still the leader, but I'm not going to let this pressure get to me. I just love playing music with these guys. Yep. That's when it's really been like they've been making great music lately, and I think they're probably happier than they've ever been in this band.
So when I got him on the phone this summer, it was an interesting time in the Phish timeline. A few years later, they would take another hiatus, and it was not as scary, I don't think, for Phish fans because they're like, oh, they came back last time, they'll come back this time, and they did. But at this time, in 2001, it's like, oh, a hiatus in many, many cases in music becomes a breakup.
Right, it's like a death sentence, basically, yeah.
So the Trey Anastasio band, the first time he came to Indianapolis, he played the Marat, and I think it was a trio.
Right, yeah, the first Trey band was the trio.
And but this show was an 8-member ensemble. At one point in the conversation, he just was very frank about why he really wanted to get on the road this summer.
I usually feel totally 100% emotionally invested whenever I get out and start playing, and that doesn't mean I always feel like things went well, I guess, at the end, but it's funny. Maybe one way I can describe it is I've done a few interviews for this tour, and I've been talking about how as exciting it was to put the band together and the influences that I wanted to try going in a new direction and all this stuff. But one of the things that I was driving the car today, I'm at the Greek Theater right now. I was thinking one of the things I hadn't mentioned in any of the interviews was that I just need to play the guitar.
Trey is a guitar addict. I don't really know what to say there, but I think everything that he was saying there, and probably I have to imagine what he was going through at that time, was like, okay, we needed a break from Phish, but I got to play music.
So we've talked about how Phish doesn't come to Deer Creek as often as they used to, but there certainly was a time where it was one of the most storied, beloved stops for Phish fans. What do you chalk up the Deer Creek appeal to both the band and fans?
There's a couple ways to look at this, because there's the old Deer Creek. That really represented something special because it was this top-of-the-line amphitheater that was dropped in the middle of a cornfield.
Exactly.
And that's why I believe Deer Creek was and is special to the bands and to the audiences of all the different types of music that went in there. I remember hearing a rumor. I don't know if this is a rumor or if people just said this, but there was like this belief that Deer Creek was one of the Dead's favorite venues to play at.
Yeah, I believe that.
And Jerry in particular really loved it, which was why it was so disheartening with all that crap that went on in 95. Today, it's the same venue, but it's just the development that's around there and stuff like that has kind of taken away some of that.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I don't know what the word is, but there's like this...
For better or worse, it's now known as Ruoff Home Mortgage Music Center, and
right.
It is almost entirely surrounded by either
other corporations
or businesses or a mall.
Yeah, and I get that that's just kind of how the world works. And you know, it's like you sort of have this as a fan, especially, and if you're not kind of working in that industry, like you have this like desire that things like that would just remain sacred forever, that Deer Creek is like this temple of music, and that you have to kind of go down the 1-lane road to get to it and sit through the traffic to do that. And now it's like, it has like its own highway exit, and you can stop at any corporate chain on the way in or whatever to pick up your snacks for the show or something, you know?
I started writing about music at the Indy Star in 1998, and when I would drive out to Deer Creek, it was pastures and cows and corn.
It's not uncommon to hear people say, I still call it Deer Creek. It's because that's certainly not many people want to honor the corporate sponsorship as they mention that venue. But I think what people who grew up here or who lived here during that time really remember that place as being that, like this kind of concert in farm country, so to speak,
I used to say it was like a cross between an amusement park and a farm.
Yeah, I think that's totally accurate. And again, I get like how all this stuff works. I've been on both sides of it. Like, everything's sponsored now, and it's to the point that it's obnoxious and all that. And so being there today is a different experience. But back then it was like this really pure music experience, and you felt like you were escaping when you went there.
Yeah.
And I think there's a handful of venues across the country that still give you that feeling. Like the Gorge in Washington State is still very much has
Red
that
Rocks,
like, yeah, Red Rocks. Like you feel like you've kind of gone into this different, you've entered like this different reality almost, and you're separated from kind of the life back home, or even if it's only 10 minutes away.
I was talking to Trey in the summer of 2001, and recently Phish had won 2 Jammy Awards. Those are, a music award for the jam band scene. One of the awards was for Best Album, Farmhouse from 2001. And the live performance of the year went to Phish's Deer Creek show on July 11th, 2000, in which the band went in and out of Led Zeppelin's Moby Dick between every song in the second set. And of course, I had to ask Trey about that.
What gets in your mind when you go into something like that? Like that? I don't know. I guess just kind of in the mood. It just starts to happen. It's pretty much an extension of kind of the offstage sense of humor. Just doesn't get that we kind of drop the filter. Yeah, and kind of act the same way we act. Like maybe like somebody mentioned Led Zeppelin during the day, or no, I don't think that happened. I think probably some riff that sounded like Moby Dick happened. Yeah. And then we never know when to stop the joke. We'll just beat it into the ground rifflessly.
Nice.
Yeah, I remember that show. They essentially catered the set around that riff because they never really were playing. It was literally just that riff.
They didn't play the song.
They were playing the song. It was just the riff.
It was like the interstitial.
Yeah, they were like augmenting every song to match that riff, and like he said, it was like this joke, and they've always been known for that, like having these kind of inside jokes, whether it's a song or something like that. Again, going back
floating into Madison Square Garden on a hot dog.
Yep, they did that. Yep. There's kind of been all these like antics, I guess, for lack of a better term, particularly at those big shows, but then a lot of times even incorporated either as like something like that, where it's kind of like a recurring theme, like with a riff, or maybe even like a cover song or something that they've done as like some other spectacle at like a New Year's or Halloween show.
So this is the spot in this episode where I should probably talk about the Phish show I could have attended, but did not. In the early 90s, I worked for a newspaper in Glens Falls, New York. It was my first job out of college. Phish was going to come play at Glens Falls Civic Center on Halloween night. Yep. And at the time, I mean, my tastes were more, what was all the rage at the time was more Seattle grunge. But I found myself a kid who grew up in central Illinois, right on the border of Vermont. So when the first Horde Festival came around, I was very aware of it. There was a great radio station, still a great radio station in Vermont called WEQX that played Chalk Dust Torture in heavy rotation. I mean, Phish was the home state band. Yep. So when these tickets were going to go on sale, I grabbed a sports writer pal of mine and I said, let's go buy tickets to that show and sell them because there's a great demand for these tickets. So we did. We camped out. It was back in the day when you camped out, you stayed all night, got to the ticket window, bought your tickets. We turned a reasonable profit. But what I missed was the Beatles' White Album Halloween show performed by Phish in Glens Falls, New York.
Not only that, but what started a trend of the musical costume concept that Phish implemented on their Halloween shows, where they covered an album in its entirety from start to finish after, I'm guessing, a few months of rehearsing that album and kind of really diving into it.
So I was a dumb guy.
Yeah, well, hopefully the investment paid off for you.
No, it was, in retrospect, the memory of that show would be invaluable.
Absolutely.
The good thing is, fast forward to 1998, I get this job at the Indianapolis Star where I'm writing about music.
Thank you, Indy Star, for employing Dave Lindquist here.
Not a Phish for any kind of compliment, no pun intended. But so it's part of my job to go see Phish. And I went into the show fairly open-minded, but I was blown away. I'm like, wow, what an inventive, engaging group of musicians who just want to take the craft as far as they can. And I really was an instant convert that night.
So that was your first show?
Yeah.
And that was 98, you said, at Deer Creek?
Yep.
It's not for everyone, obviously. Their music is different. The live show experience is different. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're like someone like yourself who's obviously experienced a huge variety of music and written about it and studied it and interviewed the artist and that kind of thing, you can go in with kind of an open mind or I'm here to experience this, but I'm not going to necessarily know every song or know every note of the music. I'm just going to come in and kind of let's see what these guys got. Like when I saw my first Phish show, I was ready for it. I was a fan and I wanted to see it, but I think I'm always curious to know what that's like for someone who's just kind of going in all right, I'm kind of curious to see what this is like, especially on a good night. Chances are you're going to at least respect it or like something about it.
So. I should back up and clarify that when I worked at that newspaper in Glens Falls, New York, I was not a music journalist. I should have said that at the top because I wasn't a jerk rock critic who was buying a ticket for a Phish show and selling it. Sorry, I was a copy editor. Yeah, sorry.
Welcome, this is a farmhouse. We have cluster flies alive.
The Phish hiatus starts after the release of my personal favorite studio album, Farmhouse, largely because when I listened to Farmhouse, it took me back to those days when I lived in Glens Falls. And it's interesting that it kind of ties into what we were saying about Deer Creek. It's like a nice pastoral, going back to the country kind of vibe.
I haven't spent a ton of time up where they're from, but I know enough about it, and I've been kind of in that area. I lived for a short time in kind of outside of New York City in what's sort of described as, at least scenic wise, as kind of upstate New York, you know?
What's the line in Farmhouse, the title track, about cluster flies? And if you've never experienced cluster flies, it is something you remember. These are fierce, big old dirty flies.
Indeed. Yep. Just like if you're a rapper from Queens in the 80s,
sure,
your surroundings were very much lending itself to the songwriting and to creating these kind of timeless experiences through music. So
somewhat selfishly, I wanted to ask Trey about Farmhouse, this record I really love.
I always think when I listen to it that it's kind of about this taking all back home simplicity, all the songs like In-Law Josie Wales and Sleep, and Bug and Dirt and all this stuff are all about getting back to a simple life, which is the life that we know pretty much in Vermont, and Farmhouse too, that song, and so that's kind of, to me, it was pretty representative of the emotional feelings that we were having at that period of time that preceded us kind of taking a little breather.
Yes, the breather.
The first of a couple breathers for them. But yeah, I mean, I think a band like Phish or a rock band or someone who's really writing a lot of songs, you know, and not just trying to like make hits, but someone who's just really writing songs more from the emotional perspective or, you know, that kind of thing, that it's very much just reflective of their experience at the time or their surroundings. And so like he's saying, like he's referring to kind of this simplicity of life in Vermont, you know, and how that sort of translated into these songs, and even in the titles being just kind of these very simple bug, dirt, you know.
And it's a contrast to, you know, the earlier kind of mythology kind of stuff.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, and a lot of their music early on especially was not simple at all. I mean, it was very, you know, even they would admit that, like, if they're out of practice, they're not playing these songs that well. Like, you got to be practicing. Even if you've played them 1,000 times, like, if you haven't played them in 5 years, like, you're going to struggle because it's complicated music, you know, a lot of parts, a lot of notes.
Perfect seg. I do want to compliment through the years of this job, one thing that I definitely have found, and I believe that a jam band music fan is like the most open-minded music fan, the most willing to respect what the musician is doing. So I've always appreciated that about jam band fans.
I would agree completely. I mean, that's kind of how I've always described myself, as someone who's like truly into almost all types of music. You know, like, I mean, I was really into jazz in high school and college especially, and because I sang in choirs, I was always very connected to the classical music and, you know, listened to a lot of that and still do, at least to some extent. You know, I mean, basically all these different types of music have kind of flowed in and out of my life and in my soul and brain, and I think that, you know, especially since jam bands like Phish and Humphreys McGee, for example, tend to incorporate so many different types of music into their sets, like either through covers or just like riffs and little like influences. Like Trey talks a lot about like playing ditties and like how he practiced that way, and so you'll hear that come out in the music. It's just like some of it's like really playful and some of it's more like, all right, let's cover a Rage Against the Machine song or whatever. Like, there's just all these different types of music because the fans appreciate it. They're not like, oh man, now they're not playing a Phish song, you know.
Shout out to Humphreys McGee. The first time I saw them at the Vogue, they won me over for life by covering Fugazi's Waiting Room.
Do you know what year that was by chance? Because I opened up for them at the Vogue DJing one of their shows there.
Nice.
It might have been,
I want to say 99, 2000.
yeah, it was somewhere around that time period. So I don't know if it was that show or not, but
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent connection.
yeah.
One of the cool things that I got to speak with Trey about in this time when he had the 8-member Trey Anastasio band out on the road was some music theory.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do with this band is combine sort of like a dance vibe with the African juju music, King Sunny Ade, Fela Kuti, bands like that. Yeah. With sort of a big band aesthetic. Okay. Where there's more of a harmonic element, which is something that I'm very interested in. So I've got the band up to 8 people right now, a 4-piece horn section, and a lot of horn charts with kind of cross rhythmic qualities to them.
Last summer, I was able to interview a trombone player named Natalie Cressman, who's now in the current Trey band, but she's in 2001. She was probably in kindergarten or something, you know, very, very young. But one of the things that I really appreciated her speaking about was kind of a callback to what Trey told me about, like, if you listen to a Fela Kuti band or also like a Tito Puente band, one of the things that I always love about that music is a listener can choose to focus on one segment or another. Like, you can listen to a rhythmic pattern for like 10 bars and then kind of shift your mind and listen to a different one, and it's all intertwined. It's amazing.
It's such a great point, and I think what you're absolutely right with that type of music and those types of musicians that he mentioned and that he was kind of trying to use as inspiration. You hear it certainly in those bands, but then in those days of the Trey band, it's like these, you know, it's like these kind of beats like that. Like you said, you can just kind of sit and get lost in that. But then the whole point of this type of music from a individual band member perspective is that they're all kind of layering these sounds, and it's not like a bunch of solos, you know.
Right,
it's just like these, it almost becomes like meditational, you know, like these grooves. Yeah.
That's how I define Fella. It's like, take me.
Yeah. You just kind of can get lost in it, and you're like, have I been listening for 5 minutes or an hour? I don't really know.
But so Trey expounded a little bit in this interview about that.
Music, to me, has always been about inviting people in, you know what I mean? That's the feeling I have when I'm playing. It's really important to me, and I'm sure it's probably pretty obvious from just watching that I want to invite everyone in, you know what I mean? To me, it's a community. Music is a community builder. And so when you look at, I've been really interested in different traditional styles of music, and you talk about Latin music or reggae, think about Bob Marley's band. I don't even know how many people were in that band, but at least 8 probably, right? Or more than that, because they had the 3 backup singers. And King Sunny Ade's band had 22 people. Wow. And it's kind of like, when you listen to it, you'd never know, because everybody's playing such a simple little unobtrusive part, but when they're all put together, it makes this amazing pattern.
In the year 2001, pretty much everybody I got on the phone, I would ask the same question to everyone, so at the end of the year, I could make a compilation story. The question in 2001 was about occupations they may have pursued if music hadn't become their thing. Now, Ryan, I'm going to pose the question to you. What do you think you'd be doing?
Oh, man. Well, I studied at IU at Indiana University, and I was an environmental science student. So I guess at one point I thought I'd be doing that, like some type of work in like environmental consulting or engineering or something along those lines. But then when I got out of school, I kind of just sort of drifted from it quickly for a variety of reasons, I think. I grew up basically always really into 2 things, and that was sports and music. I ended up in one of those things, at least to some extent.
Yeah. Well,
I wasn't a good enough athlete to take that to the next level. But those were kind of always my 2 passions, were sports and music. And it was just like in high school, especially, that's like all I did. I mean, I played 3 sports and was in choir and in theater, and that's how I occupied all of my time.
Well, if I could ask you a little bit about what is it in your makeup that makes you want to like present events for people or help people have an entertaining good time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think with Orange, oh man, there's so many things that come to mind, but I think there were two main things that kind of brought me to that place and led me to that creating that experience. And one was just this passion for so many different types of music, and for me especially music. And then I kind of developed this interest in the visual arts as I got older, and particularly around that time when we started doing that. And then the other thing too is I think I was just always good at organizing and kind of like motivating, people to do things. Like, I don't know, I just like always, that just kind of came a little bit more naturally to me, was like the idea of like, all right, let's do this, and then start kind of like getting everyone to get involved. You know?
Yeah, I like it.
But one of the things too for me that got me to that point was honestly going to Phish shows and going to concerts in general, but especially Phish shows. I'd kind of be there and I'd be like looking around at the lights and paying attention to like details at the venue that like no one else was thinking about when they were at a show. Yeah. But for me, it was like, okay, so this is how this works. And I'm like, I don't know, like there was something going on in my brain that was just paying attention to different things that other people weren't. And I think that kind of all, I mean, I guess you could look at it this way, is like seeing bands like Phish and kind of seeing how they were kind of like me, just like these nerdy guys in high school that, really wanted to do something big and great. And then they took their inspirations and just went for it. And that's kind of what I did too, is like, all right, let's just do this, and like see what happens.
Okay, you mentioned sports. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a sports writer. when I was in Glens Falls and I bought those Phish tickets and I sold them. I wasn't a sports writer, but I also was not a music journalist, so that was not a problem.
Nor were you aspiring to be a scalper.
No. Very uncharacteristic, this whole episode.
Totally. Today, I'm like surprised to hear this story about you, Dave. Like, but I love it.
Okay. So anyway, sure enough, Trey also talks about sports in his answer to my question about an alternate occupation.
What I want to do is be a professional hockey player. Yeah. What I never would have been. What I would be doing is probably, I mean, what were you studying in school? Philosophy. Yeah. And music. Yeah. Which that doesn't get you too far in life. Well, those hockey salaries are spiking up right now. They sure are, but not for somebody who sucks. Did you play all the way through your year? Yeah. I was pretty into it. That was my first obsession.
So I, too, was a hockey player. Totally obsessed with it. It was one of those things like music for me that, like, when I first discovered it, I was like, this is totally my sport. Like, I was into swimming and baseball and stuff before that, and like I just never really quite and don't get me wrong, I was never great at hockey, but it was more of a natural fit for me, and I at least was playing well enough that I could enjoy it a little bit more than some of those other sports. But yeah, I totally was like never good enough to go to that next level, but I sure wish that I could have been, and I always played hard. I mean, I played like through college and until I got a pretty bad concussion a few years ago. I was playing in just adult leagues for fun because I just absolutely love the sport. It's the greatest sport on earth in my opinion.
Well, that'll about wrap it up for this episode of Dave's Old Interview Tapes. Thanks so much, Ryan, for your Phish insight.
My pleasure, Dave. It's always great to see you, and thanks for having me in.
Same here. Thanks to our listeners for checking out this episode. If you're at a platform where you can rate a podcast, please do so. Tell your friends. All is appreciated. And we'll return with another episode of Dave's Old Interview Tapes.